Our story begins in a place that seems to be a vertical cave, sunlight entering the area, revealing some houses built into the cave walls. Two people in a deplorable state are talking, and one of them, who appears to be our MC, says he had asked the woman if she could leave him alone. She places her hand into the bowl he was using to mash some kind of candy, bringing her hands to her mouth. All she can say is, "Eat candy," and her expression doesn't look good at all, as if she suffers from some kind of mental illness. He slaps her hand, causing her to fall to the ground. And in this scene we see that he wasn't the only one there. The boy who hit her is named Li Huowang, and he explains that it was medicinal paste, not candy, but he knows she can't understand that. Still lying on the ground, the girl says it was fun, but all the MC can think about is how that cursed place was like a museum of horrors. He then wonders why he was there with those people. Something catches his attention, and when he looks back, he sees someone approaching another girl, asking her to let him play with her. Weak and barely able to speak, the girl tries to say no, but the man doesn't seem to care and says it'll be quick. He starts laughing as others watch the scene. The laughter grows louder while the girl continues to protest, and the MC pretends not to see anything. His thoughts are that everything there was fake, just an illusion. While continuing to prepare the medicinal paste, he keeps telling himself that it was nothing more than a horrifying illusion, a cursed nightmare. But in the next moment, the stone he was using to crush the medicinal herbs was smashing into the abuser's temple. He had run over to help the girl, but his mind still insisted that everything was fabricated. The man starts groaning in pain, clutching the spot where he was struck. He yells that the boy is screwed now and asks if he doesn't know how their master is. Now the boy was a dead man. With a defiant look, the protagonist replies that the man is insignificant, causing the man to widen his eyes, asking how he dared to speak like that and insult their master. Everyone falls silent as someone approaches the area and asks if they had just been arguing. Calling for the protagonist and the man, whose name was Wang, he says the master wanted to see them right away. The girl who had been pushed appears again, only saying, "Ah," while Li says nothing. Wang starts laughing, saying the protagonist was done for. Today would be his turn, and he wouldn't live to see the end of the day. Li remains silent until someone tugs at his clothing. It was the girl he had saved from being assaulted. She begged him not to go, but it wasn't as if he had a choice, right? The little girl approaches and says there were candies there, and, freeing himself from the white-haired girl, the MC follows the man who called him. The three leave the cave, but where is Wang, who was also called? Or is the girl named Wang? Watching the three leave, the white-haired girl is unable to say anything more. And, outside the cave, they seem to be at the end of a valley. Frustrated, Li wonders why these things happened to him, why he got angry when he saw that kind of thing. He thinks that clearly his personality wasn't that extravagant. He couldn't let these things change the way he was. Still reflecting, he tries to calm himself, saying he wasn't himself at that moment. But the girl starts touching his arm, trying to get his attention. He yells at her, asking what she was doing, and then grabs her arm. In the girl's hand, there was a small package. She opens it, revealing something that looks like slime. I think it's that medicinal paste he was making, and asks if he wants candy. He looks but doesn't respond immediately. Wang tells him to take it, and he finally does. She says the master is very great, and gives candy to all of them. Her behavior is truly very childish. They enter a place that somewhat resembles a volcano, and the two young people stand before something that looks like a furnace. Still walking further into the new cave, the girl sees the master and calls out to him. The master greets the two of them, and turning around, he says they made him wait too long. His face is horrendous, with several teeth missing. Does no one brush their teeth in this place? Doing a backflip, the master lands right behind the two boys, startling the protagonist. With a quick movement, he strikes the girl on the back of the neck, sending her flying forward, directly into the furnace. The master begins to revel in the girl's screams, uttering something akin to a ritual chant. He says, "By Cho, my life is extended, my spirit defended. By Jiazi, my body is shielded. By Jiashu, I am preserved. By Jiashen, my fate is sealed." The girl cannot even perceive that she is dying, and then her body begins to liquefy inside the cauldron where she was thrown. The final words are spoken. By Jiazi, my soul finds vengeance. By Jiachen, my true spirit is revealed. The master commands them to heat the cauldron even more because they needed to condense pills. Li stood there, watching the scene, still unable to believe what he was seeing. Two girls start to tilt the cauldron containing a red paste inside the furnace, and he thinks to himself, trying to convince himself that the smell was fake, that the ball of meat resembling a lion's head was also fake. The master then tells the protagonist that he said the master was a fraud. He asks if that was true, but still without answering, the boy thinks that even that voice was fake, was false. Shouting, the master commands him to speak and asks if the cat had caught his tongue. Fake, 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 everything was fake, until, suddenly, the master lunges to try to kill him too, and as he approaches, something changes. The place begins to take on a green hue, which confuses the master, while Li is still thinking that everything is fake. The protagonist has his eyes tightly shut, until he decides to open them, and then he finally wakes up, lying on a stretcher. He is completely restrained and unable to move. He hears the sounds of medical equipment, and again, he begins to think that everything was fake. Someone approaches him and asks how he felt about the illusion this time, and what was new in it. He just says it was all the same. He says there was only one thing different. The other man, who seems to be a doctor, asks what it was. Li asks if he had ever told him about the disciple Wang. This time, the master cruelly killed someone in front of him, and then used the body to refine pills. The doctor was taking notes on the protagonist's accounts, and he asks if the doctor could tell him what those illusions meant. But the man only responds that no, he didn't need to concern himself with such things. He should be far more worried about the duration of each illusion, as well as his mental stability. The MC remains silent at this. The doctor says that now that he was free from the syndrome of persistent hallucinatory perception, he needs to remember that none of it was real. Leaving the room, the doctor says there was one more thing. Every time he falls into these illusions, he needs to act according to the plot that is unfolding. Only then could he be discharged from the hospital, which he hoped would be as soon as possible. Someone approaches the boy's room, and it is a woman, asking if he had heard that. The MC notices her presence and she continues, saying he had to listen to the doctor obediently. She is very beautiful. She must be the MC's girlfriend. The boy calls her name, Nana, and she sits beside his stretcher. Happy with her presence, he begins to smile. But she says his smile was very ugly, something he doesn't mind hearing, laughing at it. Telling him to stop laughing, she opens her bag, saying for him to see what she had brought for him. The review materials the teachers had assigned him. Frustrated, he says they've been partners since childhood. Was that really how she wanted to come back to him? Hitting the book on his head, she says of course not. Then says she had something else. She takes a Nintendo Switch out of her bag and hands it to him. The boy lunges to try to grab the console, but she pulls it out of his reach, telling him to call her big sister so she would give it to him. The two of them get very close to each other's faces, and it makes her a little nervous when he calls her sister. Taking advantage of her distraction, he manages to grab the console and says that she really was his sister. She didn't know how boring it was to be in that mental hospital every day, and then she starts playing something. Even though he wasn't crazy, it suffocated him. Nana tells him to play less and remember to do his homework. He shouldn't forget what he promised her. This makes him stop for a second and respond that he remembers. Approaching him again, she reminds him that the two of them agreed to go to the same college, and then gives him a hug, saying he'll recover soon. She returns the hug and tells him to get better quickly, because she'll wait for him. It was getting late, so he gets off the hospital bed and says he'll walk her to the hospital gate, and she agrees. But as he steps into the hospital slippers, his mind starts to feel confused. Standing there, his head begins to hurt, and he sees something that shouldn't be there. The medicine pestle he used in his illusion. This makes him nervous. Nana asks what's wrong, and we finally learn the MC's name. He was following the doctor's recommendations. This shouldn't happen. He recovers momentarily and says it was just a joke to scare her, asking if she got frightened. Embarrassed, she asks if he's a child to be doing this kind of thing to her. Angry, she walks away, leaving the protagonist behind. Looking to the side, he wonders if he saw the pestle by mistake, because at that moment, the illusion had faded. But without thinking much, he asks Nana to wait for him, and starts leaving the room. As he steps out, we see the pestle he had seen earlier, faintly glowing. Could the two worlds be merging somehow? Outside the hospital, Huowang asks Nana not to be mad. He just wanted to make her happy. Meanwhile, we see other patients looking at the two and laughing eerily. Wang asks Nana again not to be mad, and wonders if she was truly ignoring him. But when she turns around, she's smiling and playfully pokes his face. She says she'll come back to visit him next week, so he should take care of himself while he's there. Back in the hospital, the MC begins to reflect on what had happened. He really had seen the medicinal pestle in his room. Could his condition be worsening? If that's the case, he won't be able to leave the hospital in time for the college exams and won't keep his promise. Even though Dr. Li was the best doctor his father had found to treat his condition, it was all still very frustrating. Again, the protagonist feels something strange. as if there's something in the pocket of his shirt. He wonders what it is, and when he reaches into his pocket to find out, it's the sweet paste the girl in his illusion had given him before being thrown into the cauldron. He scoops some with his fingers and tastes it, wondering how things from his illusion were appearing in reality. Immediately, it occurs to him that he needs to tell Dr. Li about this, so he runs down the corridor. But then something comes to mind. If all of this was real, then there was more than just sweet paste in his hallucinations. There was also an opportunity. Back in the valley where the protagonist's hallucinations took place, we see the pestle on the table. He was asking if the people there had any money on them. Gold, silver, or even a jade pendant would work. Did they understand that? They couldn't spend that kind of thing in this place, so they could lend it to him for a moment. No one responds to his question, so he gives up. There was no way this bunch of drug addicts had any money. Someone calls out to him from behind. It was the white-haired girl he had saved in the previous illusion. She asks if he has time to go with her, tugging on his clothes. In another part of the cave, he waits for her to speak. Then the girl pulls something from her ankle, a very thin red anklet. Handing it to him, she asks if it's enough to help him with whatever he needed valuable things for. Approaching the girl, he takes the anklet in his hands and thinks it's very thin, but it's still quite heavy. Examining it carefully, he realizes that, in the end, it's made of gold. Putting the piece into his robes, he says it was good. He would keep that anklet for a while, and then return it to the girl. He takes a candy cane and hands it to her, saying it was edible. She thanks him for the gift. Some people were watching them from a distance, and one of them says they were expecting to see something fun happening. But that wasn't the case, until someone approaches them from behind and asks what they were doing there, why they weren't working. The small group disperses, and we see the girl still sitting on the ground, with the protagonist kneeling near her, and looking up at the man standing above. Recognizing the protagonist from that distance, he says it's a shame he couldn't be used as a medicinal ingredient for his master. Li doesn't respond, just stares at him for a while, and remembers his name was Xuanyang. Turning his back on him, Xuanyang says it's time to get back to work. If they don't make the master's medicines soon, he'll skin them alive. Looking at him, Li notices that the man's robes had a jade pendant and wonders if it was supposed to be an antique. Giving a sarcastic smile, he thinks the pendant was excellent and that it would soon be his. Night falls inside the cave. It was already 3 a.m. and we see the outside of Xuanyang's burrow. The protagonist was there, probably trying to steal the jade, but he thinks things weren't as easy as they seemed. In the end, Xuanyang wasn't in his burrow that night. If he could sell that jade piece, it could support him and Nana throughout their college years. But isn't his father rich? Fleeing, he starts humming that the jade pendant was his, but going a little further, he notices lights where there shouldn't be any at that hour. It was a red light. He stops to observe, wondering if someone was ahead, when, out of nowhere, Xuanyang appears behind him. Even I got startled seeing him. He asks what the MC was doing there at that hour. Also startled, Li turns to him, and Yang asks why he was wearing the medicinal servant's robes, then says he's very lucky. Pulling him by the shoulders, he tells him to come with them because everyone there was fleeing that place. The guard at the exit had already been dealt with. The MC asks if they were planning to escape that place when he's grabbed by his robes. Xuanyang tells him that if he doesn't want to go with him, he could die there because they wouldn't let him snitch on everyone. Li thinks this plot twist turned into a massive headache, but it didn't matter. He could return to the hospital whenever he wanted. What could a bunch of NPCs do to him inside a hallucination? He closes his eyes to return to the hospital, and then he manages to wake up. Tied to the bed, he realizes he's back. As expected, he was still anchored to reality. At that hour of the night, the nurse was probably sleeping too, and he had no way to check if the jade pendant had made it to reality with him. It didn't matter, he would return to the hallucination and check those things later. Back in the illusion, he realizes everyone was gone and wonders if they had already managed to escape, and then he chuckles, telling himself they couldn't hurt him inside his own hallucination. The day was dawning, and one of the medicinal servants runs to where all the slaves were, shouting that the master wanted everyone gathered at Huian Hall. Some were still waking up and asked what was going on, but no one had any idea. Only the protagonist remained lying down, saying nothing. Everyone was gathered at Huian Hall, in front of the Qingfeng Temple. The master appears before everyone, asking if everyone was there, making Li wonder what that old man wanted with them now. Walking calmly, the master says that the previous night, some people tried to escape, and among them were 2 of his personal disciples. The ones who tried to escape were tied up and gagged behind him. Walking among those he had summoned, he explains that the rules of the Shishan Donghua sect were clear. Rewards for merit and punishment for transgressions. Desperate and afraid, the ones tied up start muttering. Li thinks it's pathetic that they were captured so easily. Using a telekinesis technique, he makes the 4 fugitives float while tied up, and with a hand seal he says, "Open." A massive hole opens beneath the transgressors, causing them to fill into a dark abyss. The MC goes back to thinking that all of this was nothing more than a hallucination created by his mind. There was no reason to feel afraid. But even with this thought, the murmurs of despair were terrifying, leaving the protagonist paralyzed. Suddenly, something appears behind him, like multiple tentacles moving at incredible speed, striking someone beside him and instantly eliminating them. Frightened, the MC wonders what that thing was. Could it be something created by his hallucination? He was afraid it might hurt him. The master appears before them, controlling the tentacles, and declares that anyone with bad intentions must remember what happened today. These words leave the other slaves paralyzed with fear. The master declares that helping someone like him become immortal is a tremendous merit, and when he ascends to immortality, he won't forget the kindness of those who helped him. Turning to the MC, he asks if the traitors from the previous night invited him to join their escape, and whether it was true. Li begins to think that this is all an illusion. The master, the other people, everything was just a creation of his mind. Why should he feel afraid of it? Placing his hand on the protagonist's head, the master says, "That's good, he's very good." The master finds the protagonist quite talented and declares that from now on he will be his disciple, a Taoist master, and he will have to manage their supplies. Without more Taoists, the master has to manage the supplies and the Taoist master, and he will have to manage their supplies. He seems shocked by this promotion. Now he is an official disciple and someone tasked with managing the supply room. Li doesn't believe his position rose because of his talent, but rather because the master is running out of people to help him. The master decides to change his name, declaring that from now on his name will be Sun Young, as it's a Taoist name. The MC notices that it's the same name as the late disciple who died, but he doesn't have time to dwell on it. The master throws a small package into his hands, leaving the protagonist curious about its contents. The master explains that these are immortal pills he personally refined. Consuming them would extend one's life by 10 years, and also enhance their strength for self-preservation. Addressing the rest of the group, he warns that opposing a master is a path of no return, but those who assist him will be generously rewarded. The MC looks at the elixir and wonders if it was refined using a human body. It seemed to emit a very dangerous, dark energy. Back at the hospital, the MC can't believe he managed to bring all those things into his reality. Now, as the next step, he needs to verify the authenticity of the jade pendant and the gold anklet. But if the valuable items are real, does that mean the elixir is real too? He wonders if he should try one. Suddenly, the door to his room bursts open, and Nana shouts the protagonist's name, startling him. She says that after his call, she skipped her classes and sneaked in by climbing a wall. Whatever he had to say better be really important, because if it's a joke, she'll be very upset. Approaching the door, the MC begins to check if anyone is in the hallways. Then he closes the door and the window curtains. This leaves the girl completely flustered, having mischievous thoughts. She starts blushing and says people might hear them. A laugh echoes from the room's speaker, and a voice says they can't hear him, so they can do whatever they want. Approaching the girl discreetly, he slips something into her clothing. The protagonist asks the nurses to stop being so nosy. They should focus their attention on the ICU. Holding the jade pendant in her hands, Nana asks what it is, but he starts whispering to her, telling her to stay quiet and just listen to what he has to say. A few days later, still in the hospital, the protagonist is sitting on his bed, thinking that no one believes his words, not even his parents. Everyone thinks he's crazy. Nana was the only person who could be his savior because she was the only one willing to listen, and he wanted her to believe him. The scene shifts and we see something strange. Someone with a unicorn horn is being recognized by a dead person as Princess Lagerta, or was it the other way around? Back at the hospital, the loudspeaker informs Li that his girlfriend is there again, making the boy excited. She had come back, just as he had imagined she would. Leaving the room, 3 strange men approach, and as they pass by him, the MC calls out to one of them, whose name was Zhao. He asks what is going on, to which the man responds that he should quickly close his room door. It was better for him not to wander around so casually. Leaving the protagonist behind, he says that if the boy sees old Liu, he should report it immediately, because he had escaped from his ward and was spreading his medicine around. Nervously, the protagonist thinks it's strange that someone as frail as that old man could have escaped from the intensive care unit. Either way, it wasn't his business. He had to go see Nana. Outside the hospital, he finds Nana in a more secluded area, and she tells him that she had taken the items he gave her to be appraised, and that jade pendant was truly an authentic antique estimated at no less than 400,000 yuan. The bracelet was valuable too. Rubbing his hand on his head, Li says it was just as he imagined. He already knew it would be like this. He was laughing uncontrollably. He grabs the girl and shouts that he isn't insane. Nana is a little startled and asks him to calm down. More composed, the two sit on a more visible bench. He says his ability was real and asks if she was ready to get rich. Punching his rib, the girl asks what the hell he was talking about, but she continues, saying she doesn't want money. His health was more important to her than any ability like that. She asks him to promise that he will continue his treatment and not stop taking his medication. Otherwise, she wouldn't help him anymore. He is silent at first, but agrees and promises to do as she asks. Suddenly, a figure appears behind the two, grabs the girl, and pulls her away from the protagonist. It's old Leo, who throws her to the ground. Li shouts at the old man, saying that she was his friend, then runs toward them to save her, but the old man throws something at his head, immediately making him bleed and fall backward. On the ground, nearly losing consciousness, he begins murmuring for the old man to stop what he's doing, then remembers what the Taoist master said about the pills. Besides extending his life by 10 years, they would also grant temporary strength. Crying, Nana asks if the MC is okay and begins calling his name until she sees something that makes her stop speaking. The MC was standing again and his aura was terrifying. I'm not sure if she can see it, but his posture was menacing. The boy leaps toward the old man, who looks back, wondering what that was, but in the next moment, Li had already grabbed him by the neck with his arm, pulling him away from Nana. With the old man's face in his hands, he slams his head into the ground and starts beating him, saying that he had told him to stop, asking if he hadn't heard him. The boy has the smile of a psychopath at this moment. Shifting scenes, we see some chains, and from what can be understood, the MC is tied up in a containment room. He asks to be released, because as he said before, he was just reacting in defense of Nana. He was only trying to protect her because the old man was the one who attacked them first. The boy's doctor says he shouldn't call that a reaction, but rather retaliation. Approaching the boy, he asks him to tell the truth. How was he able to injure old Liu so severely? It wasn't something just anyone could do. Hesitating, the protagonist begins to stutter, but the doctor says he must think carefully about his answer, because he hates it when his patients lie to him. The MC starts thinking about what to do. He couldn't let the doctor find out about the elixir. He begins closing his eyes. The doctor asks if the MC is listening to him, but he is trying to return to the hallucination. The doctor calls his name, but he is already back in the other world. Boop. Lying on the straw bed, he thinks it doesn't matter. That place was an escape too, so it was like a solution. The one and only trinity of that world was the microcosm of Tai Chi, what they ascended to inherit in such disastrous times. They were granted the highest and immeasurable honors and praises, gifts, blessings, the alleviation of suffering, and the salvation of all beings from crisis, crowned by all the heavens, purifiers of the three realms. Zhuan Yuan. The master says that he had just joined the Qingfeng temple and must have many things he still didn't understand. Pointing to another disciple, the master instructs him to act as the protagonist's senior. The senior accepts immediately, but Li remains silent. Wrapping up, the master says it's already past 9 o'clock and there's nothing more to do. It's time for everyone to go eat dinner. The other disciple glances at the MC sideways, making the boy wonder who he is and why he's looking at him like that. The senior explains a few things to the boy. The man near the master is Brother Zhenkun, who now has only one disciple after being betrayed by others. He needs to be respectful to everyone in the temple, as they can be quite petty in the end. Li explains that he just became a disciple there and asks the senior to clarify everything he needs to know. The senior says that even as a disciple, he'll be working in the supply room and won't be learning the ways of immortality from the master just yet. This last statement catches the protagonist's attention, and he leans toward the senior, curious, asking if the master could really teach him something, like the path to immortality. Pushing the boy back, the senior says that the master's skills are indeed formidable, but the path to becoming an immortal is reserved for inner disciples like Brother Zhenkun. Reflecting on this, the MC tells himself that this place truly has a lot to offer, especially in terms of learning. He had to fight and also bring more money back to reality. They arrive at the temple's alchemy room, where the cauldron burns intensely. The master stands before it, waiting until a reaction occurs, and several pills begin to glow inside the cauldron. Using telekinesis, the master gathers all the pills into a flask, saying it wasn't bad at all. The MC watches in awe, realizing his perspective was too narrow by only thinking about money. If he could bring that kind of skill into reality, it would be life-changing. The master calls the protagonist by his new name, and he approaches, already wondering if there's some task he needs to perform and how to do it properly. He asks the master what he desires. Confirming that he's now in charge of the supply room, the master instructs him to fetch a primary herb known as Bai Ling Miao. For a moment, as I was reading, I thought he was going to ask for a herb called ligma. if you know what I mean. The boy begins to think, and the name reminds him of the white-hailed girl who gave him the anklet. Not responding to the command immediately, the master approaches the protagonist and asks if he didn't hear him. He had spoken to the boy. Closing his eyes, Li realizes he has no other choice. At that moment, someone calls his real name, and he begins to wake up back in the hospital. Both the doctor and another woman are beside his bed. It's the protagonist's mother, and she seems very relieved to see him awake. However, the boy wants to know why the doctor is there with them. Concerned, the protagonist's mother asks about the bandages on his head and whether it hurts, but he says everything is fine and he's not feeling any pain. She makes a slightly strange face, still worried, complaining that he's getting very thin and asking if the hospital food is bad. The boy is completely strapped to the bed, and she says she brought his favorite candy and will feed him. Huowang tells her not to worry about it. She barely has time to come visit him, so he just wants her to spend some time with him. Agreeing, she says at least this time he's awake, otherwise she would have been taken by the doctor to speak with the family of the old man he attacked. The doctor insists that Mr. Liu's family is still waiting to meet her, and she says she knows but wants to say one last thing to her son. Niso, Shichi Senchang, Senoki Kawa. The boy tries to convince her, saying he only acted in defense of Nana because the old man attacked first, but she takes her bag off her shoulder and says the doctor already told her what happened that day. Cheerfully, she says he doesn't need to worry because she will protect him. Huang says nothing, as his mother says she's going to meet them, and that he should listen to the doctor and take his medication. The protagonist tries to call out to her once more, but she doesn't respond and leaves the room, with a look that says she's ready to fight anyone who opposes her son. He notices this stance from his mother and knows she's going to confront the old man's family, but without much time to think about it, his consciousness begins to fade, pulling him to the other side, and he doesn't know how to handle the master. The doctor then says they will continue the conversation, interrupted earlier, but he is no longer present to respond as his eyes close. Someone near him says that he's awake, and the boy replies yes, addressing the master. He was awake. He begins to wonder if the pill refinement using Bai Ling's body had already been completed when the master grabs him by the face and orders him to open his mouth. In his other hand is a strange object, and then the master shoves this thing into the protagonist's throat. Something hideous, black and tentacled is in the MC's mouth, and he wonders what that crazy old man was trying to make him swallow. The master says that if he doesn't open his mouth wide enough, how will he be able to swallow the black taisui? Struggling with the thing crammed into his mouth, the master says it's good, and as long as he swallows it whole, it could suppress his hysteria. The boy refuses to eat it and tries to remove it from his mouth. Pulling the strange creature out of his mouth, Huowang thinks to himself that he isn't sick, but the master calls two disciples, Cha Ming and Chang Gren, who immediately appear behind the protagonist. They draw their swords, crossing them and pinning the protagonist to the ground between the two blades. The master then asks if he will not eat the tai sui. He had to eat it. Wondering why he had to eat it, his reality begins to shift, and his eyes start to close. Once again, he hears his real name being called from afar, the volume of the call growing louder and louder until he wakes up, panting and frightened. With him is Nana, who asks if he's okay, as it seems something was wrong with him. He says her name, but someone else calls his name, and it's the doctor, wanting to know what he was seeing in his hallucinations as they were becoming more frequent, along with his emotional fluctuations. Thinking about it more, he remembers that he's not completely free of them yet, so he asks Dr. Li if he has any medication that could suppress the hallucination. At first, the doctor doesn't reply, but leaving the room, he says he might still have some of the last ones used and would prescribe new ones for him. Nana goes to retrieve the medication, and the doctor adds that this medication was only a support. To get rid of it completely, he still needed to follow the doctor's methods. Taking the medicine along with a glass of water, Nana offers it to the protagonist, but he says he just wants the medication, no water. As he returns to the hallucination, the two things mix as if he were swallowing both the medicine and that tentacled thing. In the next instant, still in reality, the protagonist says he is now safe. As long as he's medicated, there would be no hallucinations. Nana asks what he means by being safe. What fear does he have inside the illusions? Huowang responds that it's nothing, just that the person he hallucinates with keeps saying strange things and fed him something weird. He laughs at his own misfortune and says he's from the modern era There's no way the Huowang Li from that hallucination could be his true self. Despite telling himself that everything is just a hallucination, one of the tentacles emerges from his mouth, leaving him utterly terrified, wondering why he was starting to hallucinate when he had just taken the medication. He didn't want to go back there, and thinks that if he closes his eyes and opens them again, the madness will disappear. But then he hears his master's voice, saying that he claimed he wouldn't eat the strange thing, but had nearly swallowed the master's entire hand earlier, and still wanted to say he wasn't hysterical. Standing up, the master says that now that the hysteria is gone forever, he can return to work but must remember to take the medicine every month. He remembered to take his medicine every month. In disbelief at the horrifying thing in his mouth, he wonders if that place is his true life. The memories of Nana and the modern era begin to crumble in his mind, leaving him increasingly confused about what was real or false in his life. Scratching at his throat in denial, he tells himself it's impossible. Nana couldn't be an illusion, and the tentacle begins to slip inside. She still vomits, trying to expel that thing from her body. Unable to believe what is happening, something resembling a ghost appears, calling his name, and he sees Nana, saying she's still there with him. But when he looks more closely, he sees the ghost disappear. In desperation, he screams Nana's name and raises his arm to try to grab her, but as he closes his hand, she has already vanished completely before his eyes. Li Huowang asks why, and yelling, he wants to know why he is in this cursed place, why this illness won't leave him alone. Some time passes, and in the servants' quarters, the white-haired girl approaches the protagonist with some bread in her hand, offering it to him since he hasn't eaten all day. Holding the jade pendant in his hands, the boy asks her how she got that item, and she responds that he gave it to her. She says she didn't want it, he insisted she keep it. She recounts the same situation he experienced with Nana, and through this, we realize that it all actually happened there. She tells him he laughed and shouted he wasn't sick. Li Huowang asks what happened after that, and she explains that Brother Wang took the opportunity to hit him on the head with a rock. Brother Wang thought he was dead and tried to go after the girl. The MC remembers that this Wang is the chubby man with a cleft lip, so he asks the girl what happened to that Wang. Explaining the rest of the story, she says he was killed by the MC and asks if he doesn't remember anything. He starts trying to recall what really happened, wondering if it wasn't old Liu from the hospital. Clenching his fists, he finally realizes there never was an old Liu to begin with. He was truly utterly insane. If that place was the true reality, then everyone there would die, and the one responsible for all of it was that mangy-headed guy. The master, who is with him and another disciple, says the MC seems like he wants to say something and asks what it is. But the boy doesn't immediately respond, prompting the mangy-headed one to demand to know what he's thinking. Stammering, the boy begins to say that he, the disciple, admires the path of cultivation the master is following, and wonders when he might reach such a high level of power. The other disciple thinks to himself that it sounds like pathetic flattery, but the master bursts out laughing and replies that having ambition is not a bad thing, leaving the other disciple shocked that the master believed the protagonist's words. The master explains that it's not as though he doesn't want to teach, but things aren't that simple. One must train both internally and externally to achieve immortality. Bowing, the boy asks if the master will achieve immortality soon, and he replies that reaching such a level is not simple, though he is certain he will succeed. Raising his arms, the master returns the question to the protagonist. Did he know why the master would get there? The boy responds that he doesn't know, and this seems to make the master suspicious and curious about him. Someone mentions it's nearly midnight. It's the other disciple, explaining that if they don't refine the pills soon, they might miss the auspicious hour. Stepping away, the master says that's fine. It's time to start the preparations. The other disciple orders the boy to go to the materials room and bring the medicinal herbs from the day before yesterday. The boy asks about the medicinal guide, and the disciple responds that he should have brought the book 2 days ago, but went into hysteria and couldn't, causing the master to miss the refinement moment. The properties of the medicinal guide and the timing of the refinement affect the quality of the pills. They cannot afford any mistakes. Frustrated, the other man tells him to forget it. It makes no sense to explain further, and orders him to get to work. He notices the girl is alive. In the temple's materials room, several servants try to hide as they see the protagonist arrive. They are worried, thinking they will die there. But he only calls out for Bai Ling Miao. Without hesitation, she answers yes. Walking toward the place, the girl asks the MC if he could send a message to her family if he manages to get out of there alive. Her parents live at the foot of Mount Nushin in Liang country. She only wanted him to tell them that she wouldn't be able to care for them when they grow old, or bury them when their time comes. The girl was crying profusely, but the MC says he can't help her with that. They had to leave because their time was running out. Looking ahead, she wipes her tears, and he tells her to follow him as he pulls a blade from his robes. Confused, she continues crying and calls his name in a questioning tone. Arriving at the sacrificial site, the boy brings the medicinal guide the master had requested and announces to the master that he has arrived. The master replies that his new body from Bera. The master laughs and says the protagonist has done a good job, then immediately shouts for his good disciple to come to him. The master uses a telekinesis technique, pulling the girl toward him and grabbing her by the neck. As he holds her up, he notices something different about her. Her leg was bleeding, and he says it's a shame. He throws her back toward the protagonist and orders him to take her back. The boy bows and complies. Realizing his plan had worked, he thinks that now he just needs to get the girl out of there. But the master interrupts his thoughts, telling him to fetch another medicinal guide, as this one won't work. And he reminds the boy that there is another white medicinal guide. He must go quickly and return swiftly to avoid delaying the alchemy process. Back at the servants' quarters, he goes to fetch the other white servant, but the man is on his knees before the boy, begging for his life. Bai Ling Miao is crying in another corner, and it's at that moment the MC realizes the truth. He was wrong. He hadn't saved Bai Ling Miao's life. As long as that despicable man continues making elixirs, he won't be able to save anyone's life, because they will all die in that cauldron. The master shouts to open the furnace, and the MC thinks he has no interest in continuing to be his accomplice in this story. With the pill ready in his hands, the master tells him that the other disciples aren't as scholarly as he is, and says this one is for him. Receiving the pill in his hands, the boy thanks him, but thinks there's only one way to save those medicinal guides. The master orders him to eat it while it's still hot, and he continues to think that the only way to save himself and all those guides is by eliminating the master. He swallows the pill, and it begins to burn his mouth and the inside of his body. He feels so hot that the water in his body evaporates instantly. After the pill ritual is complete, the master tells the MC to go to his shelter and rest. The medicine is very potent and will take time for him to absorb it completely. The boy obeys and leaves. As he returns to his dormitory, Huowang walks while leaning against the walls. As his body continues to release a lot of steam, his hands sink into the stone as if it were butter, and even the slightest movement causes him to break the walls effortlessly. The voice of the white-haired servant echoes in his mind, begging not to die, and he thinks about how he ate a pill made from human essence. Something black begins to emerge from his back. He had gained enormous power from just one pill. Thinking, how would he ever defeat him? A hand approaches the boy. It's Bai Ling Miao, asking if the protagonist is okay. He can't respond properly, but she says he doesn't need to worry about anything. He's powerless in this situation too. Taking on a more rigid stance, the protagonist remains silent, which makes the girl ask him if he plans to go against the master. He is surprised by this question, and immediately moves closer to her, asking if she came there just for him. Shushing her, he says the master might find out what's happening there. Calming him down, she explains that Master Yu had gone to the market that day, so he couldn't hear them. The boy asks who this Master Yu is, and the servants begin hiding, asking if he's there to fetch more medicinal guides. Everyone is very afraid. What was expected, in the protagonist's view, was that they all now saw him as a collaborator of the bald bastard. Grabbing Bai Lin Miao by the arm, he tells her they need to go somewhere else because the place they were in wasn't safe. She follows him without protest, leaving the other servants slightly confused. In a distant location, the boy asks Bai Lin what she meant about Old Master Yu. She explains that Old Master Yu is Old Master Yu, something you cannot see or touch. She had heard from her grandfather that only high-level practitioners could summon him, but he always appears in the market every 15 days. This makes the protagonist thoughtful, as it's important information. It meant that for 2 days each month he couldn't monitor that place. Returning to the main subject, Bai Lin asks the protagonist if he really intends to go against the master of that place. The boy replies that, of course he does. He'd love to eat his flesh and drink his blood. Bai Lin then responds that he can count on her because she wants the same thing. Someone appears with a stone in hand, also saying to count on him, and both look at him in surprise. It was the servant who had been watching them leave from a distance. He says he is no one, just a child born without a name, but they can call him Gua. What he had in his hands was actually bread, and he bows and offers it to them. Suspicious, Bai Lin asks if he was eavesdropping on their conversation. Rubbing his hands together in a suspicious manner, he responds that no, he would never dare. He only wanted Brother Li's protection and to hear Bai's last words, but she cuts him off, saying he knows nothing, so they can't trust him. He insists, however, that he admires Brother Li, and that should be reason enough. He wasn't listening to their argument. Instead, he was thinking about the name of the last disciple and whether he had been caught in a similar situation. Interrupting, the protagonist asks Gua if he isn't afraid of him, but Gua replies that he cannot be afraid, especially since Brother Li's actions were inevitable. With a smug look, the boy says he can join them as long as he doesn't regret it later, but he thinks to himself that he doesn't want the same fate as Xuan Yang. In the days that follow, the protagonist looks for ways to kill Dan Yangzi, but the three of them alone wouldn't be enough to defeat him. During this time, he continues moving the medicinal guides from the materials room to the alchemy room, one by one. All he could do was remember the last words in his heart until it was time for the 8th medicinal guide. The protagonist presents himself to the master, saying the medicinal guide is ready, to which Dan Yangzi replies that he already knew. He goes on to say that the boy has been doing a good job lately, and adds that the Shishan Donghua sect rewards merit and punishes mistakes. Since he's interested in learning alchemy, the master will begin teaching him the formula for the blood-nourishing pills. The two disciples are surprised, but the master ignores them and continues, saying he shouldn't underestimate this formula. Though simple, it's a method from celestial scriptures. 20 taels of human elixir, half a caddy of balm seeds. The 24 taels of sunrise stones. The furnace is lit at 3 a.m., which is the right time to take a bath. He should use his eyes to illuminate it silently, use his breath to boast, use his spirit to steam it. Gradually increase the heat with a gentle flame and ignite the furnace at 4 a.m. Exhale at the end. The boy says he'll record the formula on his robe, but as he turns to look, just as the boy is about to ask the master to check what he wrote to ensure nothing is missing, the master's foot is already in front of him and lands a solid kick squarely in his face, launching the boy backward with a critical blow. The protagonist cannot understand and wonders what is wrong with this maniac. Why did he suddenly kick him in the face? He falls to the ground, spitting blood, but keeps thinking. Even though his handwriting isn't pretty, it's still legible. The master didn't even look at it, seemingly more upset about him writing down the recipe. Stopping to think, he remembers that they had morning lessons before, and they couldn't write anything. All the knowledge was passed down orally. Shocked, the boy wonders if the maniac who was his master couldn't read while murmuring something. Was the old man illiterate? And if that were the case, who read the celestial books he mentioned? Approaching him, saying he didn't expect this from Xuanyang, the other disciple says the master even wants to pass the knowledge of the celestial book to him and is happy to be convinced by the protagonist. Sitting on the ground, the MC tells his senior that this was the master's plan to value him, and even if the master recited everything from the books, he couldn't control him. Standing up, the boy tells Jungkoon that if everything is fine, he should step aside because he was going to help the master with the ingredients. Furious, the senior kicks the protagonist in the ribs, making him feel them break to the point of spitting blood. Kicking the boy, he says he had just gotten the formula. Who did he think he was? How could the master give the formula for immortality to him if he hadn't even given it to Jungkoon? Even worse, how dare he use the master to surpass him? Did he even know where he was when he was being hunted by the master? Still on the ground, coughing, the boy provokes his senior by saying his cultivation techniques weren't that good. Otherwise, after following the master for so long, he should already have the knowledge of the techniques to become immortal. Even angrier, the man curses the boy and prepares to beat him even more. With a kick strong enough to crack the ground, he shouts that the MC was looking to die. The other senior, who had told him about Jungkoon, approaches the protagonist, who was still lying on the ground, and asks why he was so disobedient. He pulls the boy up, helping him to stand while he continues coughing, but asks how he planned to kill him. If any more of Master Dan's disciples die, they won't be able to maintain that place. Besides, Master Yu was watching from the side. Confused, the other senior asks who this Master Yu was. The boy is surprised to see that Xuan didn't recognize the existence of Master Yu, leading him to think about the recent events he had witnessed. From what he understood about the maniac's group, it seemed that none of the disciples knew that to be a disciple, they needed to be taught something by the master. Xuan asks why he was acting crazy. Didn't the master give him the medicine to suppress his hysteria? The boy chuckles softly, but he looks like a psychopath for having discovered the breaking point he needed. Later, he takes another opportunity to provoke Jungkoon and reveal the truth about Master Yu to him. Judging by his expression, Jungkoon knew something was about to happen, and the protagonist continued observing him from afar. He carried on with his training as usual, but when the boy was about to give up, thinking Jung-kun wasn't as greedy as he thought. On February 15, Jung-kun didn't show up for training, and Lai Zi-chao was refining pills. The boy looked for Jung-kun at Dai Youngsi's house. The door was open, but before entering, he saw Jung-kun watching to ensure no one was around. He was acting very suspiciously. Another disciple appears. His name was Zhuanyin, and the two begin talking about something, but the protagonist couldn't hear them, until they use a technique that makes them disappear completely. They were gone, and the room's restrictions must have been disabled by Jung-kun and his group. Entering the room, the protagonist says it was now his turn. Inside, there was a horrible smell of dead rats, but he continues going in until he finds a stone plaque wrapped with a rope and some strange trinkets. That must have been the celestial scripture the master mentioned. He begins reading the syllables written on it and realizes it was a sutra, not the Kama Sutra. But how could it be used to refine pills? A portal opens behind the protagonist, and someone asks if he was conspiring with the person who was in that room before him. He was about to turn around to see, but a head trapped in a vase tells him not to move, or she would call her father, who would appear instantly. Laughing, the boy says he understands everything and tells her to call her father. It would be a great opportunity for his master to find out that she doesn't understand anything written on that stone plaque. She had been deceiving him all along, and upon hearing this, the head becomes desperate. She asks how he figured it out, and he simply thinks to himself that he guessed correctly. The person interpreting the scriptures of Lazito was her. Nervously, the head says it wasn't her fault. Her father forced her to read that plaque even though she didn't understand it. He asks if she isn't afraid of him finding out, but with a scoff of disdain, she says he believes everything she says because he's illiterate. Xuanyang asks if the formula he's been using on people to refine pills was her invention. She responds that she only remembered parts of it and just said that was what was written on the but laughing, she adds that it wouldn't kill anyone. Continuing, she says she was afraid her father would discover she was useless and wouldn't want her anymore. After all, she had neither hands nor feet. Before she can continue speaking, the boy grabs the jar with one hand and, throwing it to the ground with all his strength, smashes it, making the girl scream in pain and despair. Furious, the boy says the formula really didn't kill anyone, but because of the formula she invented, her father had been eating people this entire time. The broken jar on the floor and the girl crying in pain, calling for her father, complete the horrifying scene after this discovery.
Our video ends here. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, bye bye.